Well, welcome everybody into a discussion about visibility. We are talking about service expectations of a BCO during supply chain uncertainty, which is, over the last few years, it's a conversation that a lot of us have either partaken in or tried to find solutions towards. So the point of this discussion today is to talk about how navigating through some of those disruptions. And let's just go ahead and I'll begin introductions. My name is Blythe Brumleve. I am the host of Everything is Logistics, a podcast for the thinkers in freight. And folks, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Suketu Gandhi. I'm a partner with Kearney, and I lead all our global supply chain and operations practice.
Bjorn, Jacobson, really loud. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Nexxiot.
I'm Henrik Killander. I'm a product lead in Maersk, and I'm heading up partnerships and commercial innovation initiatives.
And just a reminder to the audience, we are accepting questions. Now, there might be some little technical difficulties with the app. So if you wanted to try to submit your question on the app, please feel free to do so. We will also have roaming microphones going around the room in case you want to raise your hand and ask a question throughout the process. We'll try to save questions for a little bit towards later on. We got about 35 minutes, so we're going to go ahead and kick off the discussion. Now, in a recent Vision all hands meeting, there was a gentleman by the name of Robert Kirk from Dun & Bradstreet, and he said, we're moving from you are an entity at the whims of the world to intentional design, giving you, your ops team, and your partners the ability to create your own value chain specific to you and your needs. And so when gut instinct is no longer enough, how are we preparing our teams for that uncertainty? And I'll go to you first.
Well, gut instinct has never been enough, right? It's just we had this myth for about 30 years that supply chains were going to behave properly. We finally found out they do not behave properly. And then the only answer left is data, right? Now, it is, I know everybody will say we don't have enough data, the data quality is not good. But my retort to that is when Airbnb and Uber decided to start the business, they went around to all car owners and homeowners and said, how good is your data? They would have never gotten started. So what is the structural difference in how we think about it? We have become much more statistical in our thinking. So if you feel that, hey, you have 80% of the data and you have 70% confidence, that means you know 56% accurately of what the data means. And that is plenty to make a good decision. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing is, don't try to make too many decisions. That's the other part. We think more decisions are better. A typical CEO in an average year or a head of supply chain should not make more than 30 decisions. If they make more than 30 decisions, their effectiveness drops significantly. And there's data to prove that. And then the last thing is think about it from all the different angles, right? Do not think about it just from your perspective. And that's where you bring your customers, your suppliers, and all your partners in the discussion. But that's where the world is going.
Henrik, I'll go to you next because, we're talking about adapting to uncertainties, and there's obviously a lot of uncertainties going on in the world today between Panama Canal, the Red Sea. Port congestion is, obviously a minor one or minor compared to the other two. How can BCOs both establish and maintain reliability and trust with their customers?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I hear verbatim is, I want to hear it from you guys first, not the news. And I think that's an important thing, that trust is built by sharing information with the right people at the right time and the right place. So that's foundation building. And upon that, you can then talk about strategic planning to be able to diversify your suppliers, look at the data and analytics to reduce the risk and variability in your supply chain. And that can help drive efficiencies and more robustness in your supply chain. But like Tyson says, everybody's got a plan until they get hit in the face. So it's really important to have that real-time actionability as well built into your system and be prepared.
Yeah, we normally talk about managing by exceptions. So I think even if you have access to the multitude of data, you need to look at what's going wrong versus what should go right. So just look at the exceptions versus just look at the anomalies in the statistics. That's the message.
Suketu, I'll ask you next. What role does tech play in establishing these data points, making sure you're getting trustworthy data and then making it actionable?
Tech is the heart of it. It's the absolute heart of it. But it is only a part of the solution. Because one of the myths out there is that technology is going to fix it all. And, my colleagues and I firmly believe that it's a combination of human intelligence plus artificial intelligence that is the answer. And let me give you a practical example. And, wonderful thing you talked about exceptions. So in any decision that needs to be made in supply chain, somewhere between 55 to 65% should be automated. Those are things that you should not touch. Actually, every time human beings touch those decisions, they make it worse. Leave those alone. The next 20% require a combination of taking the data and then people making the decision. And then the last thing are what we would call genuine black swan events that cannot be predicted. And in those cases, a little bit of data and a lot of human beings make it significantly better. So really breaking it down and so using technology where it is most effective is really important, and not using this peanut butter answer that says technology everywhere or nowhere, or data that would make all decisions or no decisions. That's a terrible way to go. Besides, I like to bet on human beings versus data. They win.
Well, I guess sort of a follow-up is, Bjorn, from a European perspective, what do those table stakes look like from a data perspective and then making action on those?
I don't think there's any significance in difference between US and Europe in that sense. So, and I fully agree, you can't invest in everything, so you have to pick your hotspots where you want to do investment. The more data you have, the more complexity you also make, right? So it's about managing that complexity and still look at the exceptions and try to skip all the normal operations. Because the normal operations, it works. It works today, it will work tomorrow. That's basically it.
And Henrik, I'll go to you next. So as far as how you're managing those service interruptions and then expectations from the customer side of things, what data points are you looking for? What does that baseline, those table stakes look like for Maersk?
Yeah, but of course, we want to source high-quality data to be able to make good decision-grade kind of decisions based off that data. So we're looking at port congestions, of course, as we've talked about, but also other signals for risks and disruption in the supply chain. But we've also found, given that we're a 100,000 people company, to a little bit to your point, Suketu, that we're able to augment that data and intelligence with human judgment. So, for example, we were much earlier just bought the the Panama Canal drought, because we have people on the ground actually monitoring that situation. Same with Amazon River, we were able to kind of see the lower water levels and then be able to switch to other modes instead of barge there in that case. So small use cases and examples of where data and human judgment play hand in hand.
That's interesting, and Suketu, I'll go to you next, because it's one of those situations where for a lot of visibility players, they almost tell you when it's too late that something has gone wrong. How do you get ahead of the game?
That's a great question, because it's a hard one to really anticipate. But there are a couple of specific things that we look at. The first thing is, how is the model designed? So saying that I got these land routes, air routes, here are the trucking things. My customers are sitting in Kentucky, and I got to make sure that the product makes it there, whether it's a B2B play or a B2C play. Understanding what the model does is really important. A lot of times we are finding that folks really don't know where their weakest links are. That's the first thing. The second thing is a specific set of scenarios. Now we know things that can go wrong will go wrong. And if so, how would you test the model? And that's where technology is a really important element, because the breakdowns become incredibly clear. Last week, Vision did this interesting demo where they showed what was happening as their ships started going through the Red Sea, but they were hugging too far closer to the coast itself. Now, the question that I had, and they were going to look through that, was if it floats too close to the coast, that means there is less water. That means you can carry on less goods, so the price would go up or your transportation would be slowed down. And so running through that is really important. And then the third is having playbooks. you can anticipate 70, 80, 90% of situations that come through. So you should have a ready-made playbook that says, these are the actions we are gonna take, and not try to design on the fly. Human beings are terrible at designing on the fly, and I'll give you a real-life example what happened to me today. Flying from Chicago to here, 2 hours into the flight, the pilot comes on and says, one of the engines on the left-hand side is not working properly. Very calm voice, he comes on and says, but I think we can make it to Denver. And he didn't say, I think, we'll make it to Denver, which was really important. And he pulled out his playbook where it said the air needed to be thinner, no snow on the ground. That would make the landing easier. Then they also anticipated that they have a lot more planes in Denver that could bring us to Vegas. Now, that is a playbook that was pre-designed, and the ops guys picked it up because I went and spoke to the pilot, of course, right? Being a consultant, that's what you do. Said, why did you make this decision? He said, I didn't make it. I gave them the situation. They knew what to do, and that's how the plane landed. Now, that's what I mean by, that's a real life situation, and that's why I'm here.
Great answer.
No, I was thinking to riff off that. We see that it's really important for BCOs when they talk to us, but also which is a practice that can be used for other suppliers as well, to have business continuity plans in place, to have these frameworks in place. That's something that should be part of RFPs and should be part of the assessment of your supply chain as you lower risk by doing so. So, really good point.
Henrik, you are Maersk, right? So I also worked for Maersk. Now I work for Nexxiot, a real-time monitoring company. I think it's important to also state around the carriers. If the carrier had a perfect flow all the time, the BCO would have no worry. So it's also in the carriers, the trucking companies, all service providers around. If they manage this flow, there is no problem for the BCO.
No, that's true. But I used to say that we wouldn't need visibility if things were teleported magically, right, from A to B. You would have production and consumption, sales and consumption at the same time. But since Houthi rebels and Red Sea situation and pandemics wish otherwise, we cannot fully rely on exactly all the plans. We get punched in the face, and we have to have good plans good remedies to resolve that.
And so as we're talking about sort of these black swan events that are becoming more frequent than we would all like, what about from the sustainability angle? How are you balancing a sustainable approach versus the exception management?
So sustainability costs money. That's the first thing we should admit. It costs money. And in every large corporation we work with, there is a tension between the chief procurement officer and the chief sustainability officer. Because one says remove carbon, the other says make it cheaper. And the way it is working out now is that there is a clean trade-off that is emerging. The second part that is emerging is that if you work with your customers and suppliers a bit differently, they are willing to trade off functionality for being more sustainable. And that was an element that was never kind of really imagined up front. And then the last thing is suppliers across the board are willing. So for example, right, in the world of shipping, do you ship everything that's fully assembled, ready to go, or do you ship parts? And there is a trade-off in manufacturing because now you can do late-stage customization versus not, and that has tremendous impact. So the ability to use technology to model these things, to understand the trade-off explicitly is the most important thing. Versus saying it's important to be sustainable. Agreed, boards and CEOs can make those statements, but we who work in supply chains, we don't have the luxury. We have to still operate at cost and sustainability working.
And Henrik, I'll go to you in just a second, but Bjorn, I saw you nodding your head while he was talking, and so I'm curious as to how you're balancing sustainability with exception management.
Good question. So I think actually money is ruling the sustainability discussion, and as long as consumers don't really want to pay for it, it's not going to happen. So that's basically it. And what we do, what many visibility companies do, is create data around the CO2 emissions. at least we give the opportunity for people to see the emissions, and hopefully we can have impact on the decision making.
Henrik, I know Maersk has a lot of sustainability initiatives. Care to comment on how you're balancing the black swan events and sustainability?
Yeah, no, this is a topic we could speak for hours on, and I might not be the best suited for it, but we see that BCOs are walking that tightrope between, these high service level demands that comes from consumers, same day shipping, what you name it, that are quite costly from a sustainability point of view, while having to navigate costly, basically the cost of supplying those solutions, and also navigating a complex regulation system. We were looking at the EU trading emissions, for example, regulation that is coming. And at Maersk, we're working with two solutions, basically hardware, our eco-delivery, actually just building big ships that can solve the problem for you with sustainable solutions, but also software, where you can look at your scenarios, analyze your emissions footprint by time period, by mode, by lane, and grow into that granularity that you need to drive those decisions to take out emissions from your supply chain. So it's an exciting field, and we're humble that it's a large task, but we have clear goals on that topic.
Another one of the big topics that is I don't want to say plaguing our industry, but it's something that a lot of customers in this audience are obviously going to be dealing with, and that's nearshoring. So moving manufacturing from East Asia over back to North America. How is Maersk planning for that nearshoring effect that's going on right now?
Well, we try to support our customers by providing the capacity and the solutions where they want to source from, whether it's Asia, Mexico, or elsewhere, and also have services that help them in that sourcing initiatives, and helping them learn the language of that, being able to identify suppliers, provide analytics on when we have tens of thousands of vendors we're managing on behalf of our customers, and we know we can give good analytics and performance data on their turnaround and their impact to your reliability and your lead times. So this is part of how we help our customers manage that transition. But some things we cannot do ourselves for them. So it's a little bit like rewiring your house while keeping all your appliances connected. So there's a lot of interesting humps to get through there for BCOs.
Bjorn, I'm just curious, does nearshoring affect Europe at all? I mean, you mentioned earlier that Europe and US markets are pretty similar. I'm curious about that aspect.
I'm not even sure it's existing in US. So basically, we don't see much nearshoring. Things are moving from Asia to Europe, but then other things are just moving from Europe to Asia. So it's I think overall the volume of trade is still the same as it was, or it's probably grown. The global trade has grown a lot. So nearshoring is, you can talk about it, but I don't think it's happening.
What about you? How is your clients dealing with nearshoring?
So here are the statistics. Last year we put out something with the World Economic Forum, was about in the next 10 years, somewhere between 10 to 12 trillion dollars of supply chains are getting rewired. That's just the basic fact. And to Bjorn's point, they have started, this year we've seen, they've started slowly. And there are leaders in just about every industry that have started moving there. Because what it requires is depth of expertise to understand how do you take something that has been manufactured for 30 years in a foreign land away from you, and that has been perfected, and you bring it back here, and how do you not take a financial penalty of somewhere between 4 to 8% on your operating margin and still be viable? So that's the number one thing. The second thing is, how do you get suppliers? I think Maersk plays a really important role of connecting suppliers who bring the inputs in, but suppliers are a challenge because it is, let's say you're in China and you want to drop $1 billion of production, it's easy. You try dropping $1 billion of production in the US in specific fields, and suppliers are saying, I'll take 200 million, I don't want your billion, because I don't have the capacity to meet those needs. And then the third thing is, for 30 years we have decimated a lot of the talent in North America. And that is a significant challenge. And that's where our hypothesis is that Gen AI will become an important element of how we nearshore. But the data is showing that the leaders are moving, massive quantities are going to come through, but it's going to take a bit of time.
Well, heading into our next question, learning from those disruptions, you've mentioned AI a couple times now. How are you applying AI to learn from some of those disruptions?
The thing is, on the one side, we are at the absolute peak of the hype cycle, right? So all you got to do is put AI in a startup and suddenly your valuation is 10 times. That's fantastic. Good for you. The reality is it's much harder to put that in practice because what it takes is understanding supply chain. So let me give you a very specific example in transportation and planning. You could go and say, hey, take all this data and then make sense out of it, right? And you apply Gen AI, and we did, and it comes back with answers that are really silly. So for example, if you're trying to move alcohol, some people prefer things that are made in Tennessee. Whiskey is great, but if you try to move significant portion of alcohol during certain parts of the year, there is no way you can move it. Gen AI says, of course, move it in December, January, February, but production cycles need to be matched with that, and that intelligence doesn't live there. So then you have to take that data and adjust to it. Or they will say change lanes, change routes. There's a lot of excess capacity available, but a lot of it is deadheading, and you can't use that. So the technology doesn't understand it. That's where we are finding that there are ways to work through that. But if you understand the end-to-end chain, then the applications are boundless, and we've seen some really powerful examples, and we can talk through that.
I was going to say, can you list one of those examples for us?
Absolutely. The biggest one is in planning. Planning of products, of where they should be delivered. So there's a very large company that they found that the anticipated customer demand using Gen AI, they were able to keep 80% of the product within a one-day delivery of the customer. Everybody else requires 2.5 days. That is a game changer. Carbon goes down, cost goes down. Now, they did not go and optimize every SKU that they owned. They only optimized the most common SKUs. So they first cut it by SKUs, then did the modeling, and then came up with the answer. And I gotta tell you, those guys are scary right now on what they're able to do. Because instead of 3 days, you get it in a day, it is cheaper and less carbon.
That's really fascinating. And I'm sure, for Bjorn and Henrik, you guys are learning from these disruptions as well. What are some of those real world solutions that you're applying to, kind of combat against those disruptions and hopefully just avoid them altogether?
Yeah, for us, we're developing solutions that enable us to first identify the risks and disruptions that are happening in real time, and then formulate mitigative responses to that, whether it's rerouting or whether it's keeping the inventory on water, where we kind of keep the goods on the ships to come back at a later point to avoid if it's demurrage and detention or other costly effects of port congestion, for example. But we also want to proactively help customers move the time scale from reacting to proactively predicting some of these disruptions and sources of disruption or things that impact their bottom line. And so we made some headway on those abilities, drawing on our 12, 13 million shipments that we have every year, which is a real asset for us. So this is some of the ways we're doing that.
And then Bjorn, how are you sort of trying to prevent those disruptions from impacting your business?
So we are not trying to prevent the disruptions. Right? We are a software company or visibility software company. We try to benefit from these things. We try to provide a better user experience by applying AI. So basically what we do, we have a product called Scope AI where our company partners like Maersk, carriers, asset owners, they can ask questions. And the whole intention of our business is to support the carriers and the asset owners in providing a better service to the BCOs. basically what you could do now, you could ask questions about any sort of data that we have, but in the longer term, we want to generate the UI with AI.
And now when it comes to materials and sourcing of those materials, are there any kind of different approaches that any of your businesses are taking advantage of to try to address some of those procurement issues?
I think our procurement issues are mainly trade barriers, so they're kind of made up restrictions of moving things. So we need to do our manufacturing in Europe, in US, in China for different market segments, based on the governments do not like to have things coming in from certain locations.
That's Henrik, you had a follow-up?
Well, for many of the customers and BCOs that we're serving in lifestyle retail or brands, they of course have upstream supply chains where they want to monitor the risk profile or the ESG compliance to those, but also look at FMCG companies also very worried about material supply. So we want to make that connect. Of course, at some we're thinking about how to make that connect more distinctly and working towards that, where raw materials to connect that to the purchase order and connect those chains.
We have about 9 minutes left, so if you have any questions, please make sure you raise your hand. We'll have somebody going around with a microphone so you can ask it. But Suketu, I saw you nodding during a lot of what Henrik and Bjorn were saying, so I'm curious if you had a follow-up.
Well, so procurement is basically here's the math. 70% of an average company that makes a product goes inside supply chain. And at least somewhere between 40 to 50% of that is procurement. So it's a non-trivial problem. And what we find is chief procurement officers over the last couple of years have really changed the dial on what they're focusing on. It used to be cost alone, and now that has changed. It is availability and cost. That's the first thing. Second is they would tell the suppliers what they needed in a much shorter time than the cycle for production. So let's say if you tell somebody, hey, I need something in 6 weeks, but it takes 12 weeks to make, then what you're doing is you're putting a lot of financial burden on the supplier. That is changing. That's the second part. And then the third is upfront in the product design, the head of product and head of procurement are coming together to bring the supplier in the dialogue. Now, clients we work with might have 25,000 suppliers, so not everybody gets the right to sit at the table, but the tier ones are coming in, and that dialogue is changing dramatically.
What about from a government policy and regulation standpoint? How is that impacting everything that we've been talking about during this session?
I thought you were only going to ask rational questions. Well, actually, one of the biggest things that is affecting is the CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. That has been a game changer because now where it's made and its provenance is significantly important in the benefits you get. So that is dramatically changing. That's one. And my European colleagues can say a lot more about what the EU is doing in that space.
For sure, I'm not the expert to look at all of these, but the trade regulations, the emissions trading system that is going online is of course something that we want to support our customers in being able to navigate the custom single window opportunity, as well as opening up opportunities for us to support and meet our customers where they need and navigate that complexity, for sure.
Now, and Europe as well will develop a product passport, a digital product passport. So you need to adhere to the rules of bringing things into Europe, especially now medicine and technology products. But it's going to be all over the place.
And so, a question for the entire panel is, what does sort of the table stakes look like right now, and what tools are being developed and created in order to solve some of those problems of tomorrow today? Suketu, I'll start with you.
The biggest table stakes to start with is modeling and understanding how your complex supply chains operate. What is the flow of goods and flow of information? That is absolute basics. The second thing is knowing what drives your cost. And then the last thing is understanding the weakest link. We cannot fix all the weakest links, let's be transparent. But understanding your value at risk is really important so that that is communicated through. And then the last thing I'll tell you is we all kind of suffer from this is having the ability to crisply communicate the impact of anything versus throwing data. Throwing data at a bunch of executives or your customers without having them understand the meaning is really important. Just like the pilot said, the plane will land in Denver, right? Don't start calling your family that nice knowing you and I love you. But that is really important, is clearly communicating what's happening.
Bjorn?
So the question is how you foresee the future with technology. I don't think you can do that. So you can look at the past, you make decision from the past, and then just expect anything can happen. And you have to plan for anything that can happen. So have multiple suppliers, have multiple ways of transporting things into your warehouse or manufacturing facilities, but there is no technology that can foresee the future.
Henrik?
Yeah, and I understood it also to be about table stakes, about when you meet customers. I mean, the ability to see, provide visibility and identify the risks that can disrupt supply chain. I would maybe not call it table stakes, but it's becoming more and more important to customers. It's becoming with the three past years, that's become front and center to be able to just demonstrate capabilities and start to have a path towards that. So that's definitely front and center. Of course, we have in our transport service. I mean, it's the regular on time in full, and being able to demonstrate through data that we can deliver on those promises. But then, of course, there's the orchestration piece that Suketu has just talked about.
And speaking of having that data and being able to deliver on promises, obviously we're here for Vision, and we're discussing their new platform TradeView, which I'm sure you will hear more about in the coming few. And so for sort of the takeaway moments, final thoughts that you want the crowd to leave with, Henrik, I'll start with you. What would you like the audience to take away from this discussion?
In relation to TradeView or from this discussion more
Just
broadly?
overall
Okay.
in general.
No, I think we've had a very fun and engaging conversation. Thanks, Blythe, for facilitating this and the great comments. Learn a lot. I think this ability to meet customers where they're at, helping them serve their customers, getting the job to be done, sort of underlying job to be done for their customers by through visibility, through these. Understanding the outcomes, the processes that link that visibility to outcomes, actually being able to control through our predictive capabilities or through others, not just fancy AI use cases, but actually doing the job for the customer. That I think is something to take away. And I'm also very fascinated by the concept around anti-fragility as opposed to resilience. We talk about resilient supply chains, but I think the big promise for platforms like TradeView or Visibility is to build the foundation for anti-fragile supply chains, meaning not only do they bounce back to where they were, but they're learning, they become better, and they learn where to reduce risk and optimize towards outcomes. I think that's the bright future we're navigating towards.
Bjorn, final thoughts you'd like the audience to take away from?
Yeah, I think manage the unexpected still and plan for it. And if you have real-time data, it can help spotting the bad things sooner.
Suketu, final thoughts.
Supply chains are cool. For 30 years, it was a boring thing, but they are cool. That's the first thing. Hopefully, there's a lot more TikTok videos on that. So the second thing is people. We have a prediction that the next generation of CEOs are going to come from the ranks of chief operating officers and chief supply chain officers. Because making a product, knowing how it's made, and delivering it to the customer matters. That's the second thing. And the last thing is, if we in supply chain don't fix these sustainability problems, because we cause about 60 to 80% of all carbon, it's us, maybe we'll be, living in a much hotter world.
Yeah, well, that's a good moment to leave on, and really a thought-provoking moment to leave everybody on. We are here, this week to talk about some of these different solutions and try to make a better world for all of us and our children. So appreciate all of your time today. Please make sure that you reach out to the panelists if you have any further questions. I'm sure they'll be happy to answer them. But thank you to Vision, and stay tuned for more information about TradeView.
Thank you.
Thank you.